The sound of the slap echoed through the crowded shopping plaza like thunder on a quiet night. Everyone froze. A homeless black man named Vincent stood over a well-dressed white woman who had just fallen to the ground. Her diamond necklace sparkled in the afternoon sun as she lay there stunned. Her husband Richard, a billionaire known across the city for his real estate empire, rushed toward Vincent with rage burning in his eyes. Security guards were already running from every direction. People pulled out their phones to record what looked like an unforgivable act of violence. Vincent stood there with tears streaming down his weathered face, his worn jacket hanging loose on his thin frame. His hands were shaking, but he did not run. He looked down at the woman named Patricia and whispered words that nobody could hear over the growing chaos. Within seconds, Vincent was surrounded by 6 security guards, ready to tackle him to the ground. But then something happened that nobody expected. Patricia raised her hand from the ground and screamed at everyone to stop. Her voice cut through the noise like a knife through butter. Richard knelt beside his wife, confused and angry, demanding to know why this homeless man had struck her. Patricia was crying now, not from pain but from something deeper, something that had been buried in her heart for 30 years. She looked up at Vincent with eyes that recognized something the crowd could not see. Vincent fell to his knees beside her and said in a broken voice that carried across the silent plaza. He said, "Patricia, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I should have been there. I promised your mother I would protect you, but I failed. I failed you, and I have been searching for you every single day since that terrible night." The crowd stood frozen, their phones still recording, but now they were witnessing something they could never have imagined. Richard looked between his wife and this stranger, trying to understand what was happening to his perfectly planned afternoon. Patricia sat up slowly, her hands trembling as she reached toward Vincent. She touched his face gently, her fingers tracing the deep lines that decades of hard living had carved into his skin. She whispered, "Vincent? Uncle Vincent? Is it really you?" The homeless man nodded, unable to speak through his sobs. Richard helped his wife to her feet, his anger now mixed with complete confusion. Patricia turned to her husband and said, "Richard, this is my Uncle Vincent, the man who saved my life when I was 7 years old. The man I thought was dead for the last 30 years. The crowd began to murmur, their judgment shifting as they sensed this was not what it appeared to be. Patricia explained to everyone listening that she needed to sit down, that this story was long and painful, but it needed to be told right here and right now. Richard quickly had his security team bring chairs and water. He sent someone to bring blankets for Vincent, who was shivering despite the warm California sun. As they sat together in the middle of the shopping plaza, Patricia began to share a story that made everyone who heard it question everything they thought they knew about the homeless man in dirty clothes. She explained that when she was 7 years old, she lived with her mother in a small apartment in Detroit. Her father had left them years before. Her mother, Sarah, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. Vincent was Sarah's younger brother, a man who had served in the army and come home with wounds that nobody could see. He lived with them in their tiny apartment, helping to watch Patricia while her mother worked long nights. Patricia remembered Vincent as a kind man who always made her laugh, who taught her to read and helped her with homework. He was her hero, her protector, her best friend in a world that often felt cold and scary. But Vincent struggled with demons from his time in war, memories that haunted him in the dark hours of night. One cold November evening when Patricia was 7, a fire broke out in their apartment building. Patricia was asleep in her room when the smoke filled the hallways. Her mother was at work. Vincent was the only one home with her. He smelled the smoke before the alarms went off. He ran to Patricia's room and found it already filling with thick black clouds. The little girl was unconscious on her bed. Vincent wrapped her in a wet blanket and carried her through flames that burned his arms and back. He got her out of the building just as the roof began to collapse. He handed her to firefighters and then ran back inside screaming that he needed to save the other families. The building collapsed with Vincent inside. Everyone assumed he had died that night. Patricia spent weeks in the hospital recovering from smoke inhalation. Her mother was destroyed by grief, having lost her brother and nearly her daughter in one terrible night. But Vincent had not died. He had survived but was badly burned and trapped under rubble for hours before being pulled out. Patricia continued her story as tears rolled down her cheeks. She explained that Vincent had been taken to a hospital in critical condition. He spent months recovering from his burns and injuries. But during that time, something happened to his mind. The trauma of the fire combined with his war memories broke something inside him. When he finally recovered enough to leave the hospital, he could not remember who he was. He wandered away from the hospital in confusion. He lived on the streets, unable to recall his own name or where he came from. For years he drifted from city to city, sleeping in shelters and under bridges, his memory locked away behind walls of trauma. Meanwhile, Patricia and her mother moved to California to start over after the fire. Her mother never stopped believing that Vincent might be alive somewhere. She searched for years, but never found him. When Patricia's mother died 10 years ago, her last words were about Vincent, hoping he was at peace wherever he was. Vincent finally found his voice and began to add to the story. He explained to the crowd that had grown larger around them that 6 months ago, something changed in his mind. He was sitting in a shelter in San Francisco when a counselor showed him a picture book about firefighters. When he saw the images of burning buildings, memories began to flash in his mind like lightning. Over the following weeks, more memories returned in pieces. He remembered a little girl with braids and a bright smile. He remembered fire and screams. He remembered the name Sarah. He spent months trying to put the pieces together. He went to libraries and asked librarians to help him search for information about fires in Detroit 30 years ago. Finally, he found a newspaper article about the apartment fire. He found Sarah's name and learned she had moved to California with her daughter Patricia. Vincent explained that he traveled from San Francisco to Los Angeles on foot over several weeks. He had no money and no home, but he had a mission now. He needed to find Patricia and tell her he was sorry for disappearing. He needed to know that the little girl he saved had grown up safe and happy. He searched homeless shelters and asked everyone he met if they knew a woman named Patricia whose mother was Sarah. Nobody knew her. He spent his days walking through different neighborhoods, hoping he might somehow find her. Today, he had been sitting outside this shopping plaza asking for spare change when he saw Patricia walk past with Richard. The moment he saw her face, everything came rushing back. He knew without doubt that this was the little girl he had pulled from the flames. He called out her name, but she did not hear him. He followed her, trying to get her attention, but security guards kept pushing him away. Then Vincent saw something that made his heart stop. A man was following Patricia through the parking area. Vincent recognized the look in the man's eyes. He had seen that look before in dark places. The man was stalking Patricia, waiting for the right moment to attack. Vincent tried to warn her, but she could not hear him over the noise of the crowd. He saw the man reach into his jacket and pull out a knife. In that split second, Vincent did what his training and his love had taught him to do. He ran forward and slapped Patricia hard across the face, knocking her to the ground just as the attacker lunged forward with his blade. The knife that was meant for Patricia's back instead sliced through empty air where she had been standing. The force of Vincent's slap had saved her life for the second time. The attacker, realizing his plan had failed and seeing the crowd's attention now focused on the scene, dropped his knife and ran into the parking lot where police later caught him. Richard stood up from his chair and looked at the crowd that had gathered. He was a man who built his fortune on facts and figures, but what he had just heard defied all logic. He looked at Vincent, really looked at him for the first time. He saw the burn scars on his arms, that were visible through his torn jacket. He saw the depth of pain and love in the old man's eyes. Richard had spent his whole life making smart business decisions, but he knew in his heart that this moment called for something more than business sense. He turned to his security team and told them to stand down. He then did something that shocked everyone, including himself. He knelt down in front of Vincent and took the homeless man's scarred hands in his own. He said, "Vincent, I do not know how to thank you for saving my wife, not once but twice. You are a hero, and I am ashamed that I judged you by your appearance. Please forgive me." Patricia pulled Vincent into a long embrace, 3 decades of grief and loss pouring out in that moment. She kept saying over and over, "I thought you were dead. I thought I had lost you forever." Vincent held her like she was still that 7-year-old girl, like he was still her protector. He said, "I never stopped loving you, Patricia. Even when I could not remember your name, some part of me knew I had to find you. Some part of me knew there was someone I needed to protect." Richard stood back and watched his wife reconnect with the uncle she thought was gone forever. He made a decision right then that would change all their lives. He told Vincent that he was coming home with them today. No more streets. No more shelters. He was family now, and family takes care of each other. Vincent tried to protest, saying he did not want charity, but Richard explained this was not charity. This was gratitude. This was justice. This was what should have happened 30 years ago. The crowd that had gathered to watch what they thought would be a violent criminal getting arrested now found themselves witnessing something beautiful. Many people were crying. Some were recording on their phones, but now to share a message of hope rather than judgment. One elderly woman in the crowd stepped forward and said she had been homeless once too. She said she knew how quickly society throws people away when they cannot take care of themselves. She thanked Vincent for reminding everyone that homeless people are not trash to be ignored, but human beings with stories and dignity. A young man in the crowd said he had served in Iraq and struggled with the same demons as Vincent. He said this story gave him hope that healing was possible even after decades of pain. Person after person came forward to shake Vincent's hand and tell him he was a hero. What started as a scene of apparent violence had transformed into a moment of community and compassion. Richard called his assistant and told her to book a suite at the finest hotel in the city for tonight. He said Vincent would stay there while they figured out more permanent arrangements. He also told her to call his personal doctor and have them meet at the hotel to give Vincent a full medical checkup. Patricia held Vincent's hand as they walked toward Richard's car. Vincent kept looking around like he expected someone to tell him this was all a dream. He had spent so many years invisible, ignored, pushed aside, that being treated with dignity felt foreign and overwhelming. In the car, Richard asked Vincent about his time in the military. Vincent slowly began to share stories about his service, about the friends he lost, about the things he saw that no human should have to see. Richard listened without judgment, beginning to understand the weight this man had carried alone for so long. At the hotel, the staff stared as Richard checked in a homeless man to a luxury suite. Richard stared back at them with a look that said he did not care what they thought. Patricia helped Vincent to the room and showed him the bathroom with its large tub and soft towels. Vincent stood in the doorway of the bathroom and wept. He said he had not had a real bath in years. He had not slept in a real bed or eaten a hot meal that was not from a charity kitchen. Patricia told him to take his time, that she would have clothes brought up for him, that everything was going to be okay now. While Vincent bathed, Richard made phone calls. He called lawyers and doctors and social workers. He called veterans organizations and housing specialists. He was a man who solved problems for a living, and he was determined to solve this one. When Vincent came out of the bathroom wearing a hotel robe, looking clean for the first time in years, Patricia barely recognized him. Beneath the dirt and the years of hardship was the same kind face she remembered from childhood. They ordered room service and Vincent ate slowly, savoring every bite like it was a miracle. Over dinner, they talked for hours. Vincent shared more about his years on the street. He talked about the cold nights and the hunger. He talked about the people who spit at him and the rare souls who showed kindness. He talked about nearly giving up so many times, but something always pulled him forward. He now understood that something was the promise he made to Sarah to protect Patricia. Even when his conscious mind forgot, his heart remembered. Patricia told him about her life. She shared how she became a teacher, how she met Richard, how she built a life filled with love and purpose. She said her mother would be so happy to know Vincent was alive, and that they had found each other again. Richard revealed his plan over dessert. He said he owned several apartment buildings across the city. One of them had a vacant unit that would be perfect for Vincent. But more than that, Richard wanted to create a program to help other homeless veterans like Vincent. He wanted to fund counseling services and job training. He wanted to build transitional housing where veterans could heal and rebuild their lives. He looked at Vincent and said, "You did not just save my wife twice. You opened my eyes to a problem I have been blind to. I have the resources to help, and it is time I use them for something that really matters." Vincent protested that he was not special, that there were so many others who needed help more than him. Richard smiled and said that was exactly why he was the perfect person to help design this program. Who better to understand what homeless veterans need than someone who lived it? The next morning, Patricia took Vincent shopping for clothes and necessities. As they walked through stores, Vincent felt like a different person. People smiled at him now instead of avoiding eye contact. Store clerks helped him instead of watching him suspiciously. The simple act of being clean and well-dressed changed how the world saw him. But Vincent knew he was the same person inside. He thought about all the people still on the streets who were just as worthy of dignity, but did not get a miracle like he did. He told Patricia about a friend he met in a shelter named James, who was also a veteran. He asked if maybe they could help James too. Patricia smiled and said they would help as many as they could. Over the following weeks, Richard kept his promise. He hired Vincent as a consultant for his new veterans program. He paid him a real salary and gave him the apartment rent-free for the first year. More importantly, he treated Vincent with respect and listened to his ideas. Vincent used his first paycheck to buy a warm coat and new boots for James. He went back to the shelters where he used to stay and shared his story. He told the other homeless veterans that healing was possible, that they were not forgotten, that someone cared. Word spread quickly about the Billionaire, who was funding a new program to help homeless veterans. News stations wanted to interview Richard and Patricia and Vincent. Vincent was nervous about being on TV, but Patricia encouraged him. She said people needed to hear his story. When Vincent appeared on the local news and told his story, the response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from across the country. Other wealthy people in the city called Richard, wanting to know how they could help. Veterans organizations reached out offering to partner on the program. What started as one man's second chance was becoming a movement. 6 months later, Richard's veterans program had helped 20 former soldiers get off the streets. They received counseling, medical care, job training, and housing. Vincent worked full-time as the program director, using his experience to design services that actually helped rather than just checking boxes. He hired other formerly homeless veterans to work as counselors because he knew they would understand the clients in ways others could not. James, the friend Vincent had worried about, was now working as a maintenance supervisor in one of Richard's buildings. He had his own apartment and had reconnected with his daughter, who he had not seen in 8 years. Every success story made Vincent cry with joy. He felt like he was finally fulfilling the promise he made to Sarah all those years ago. Protecting Patricia had expanded into protecting all the veterans whose society had failed. Patricia started volunteering at the program, teaching basic computer skills to help veterans find jobs. She loved watching these broken men and women slowly rebuild their confidence and hope. She saw her Uncle Vincent in each of them. She understood now that homelessness was not a choice or a character flaw, but often the result of trauma and a system that did not provide enough support. Richard found that his veterans program brought him more satisfaction than any business deal he had ever closed. He reduced his work hours at his company to spend more time on the program. His friends in the business world thought he was crazy, but Richard did not care. He had learned that real wealth was not measured in dollars, but in lives changed. The day that Vincent slapped his wife was the day Richard's eyes were open to what really mattered. On the 1-year anniversary of their reunion, Patricia threw a party at the Veterans Center that Richard had built. Over 100 people attended, including 50 veterans who had been helped by the program. Vincent stood at the front of the room, no longer the broken homeless man from the shopping plaza, but a leader and advocate. He thanked everyone for their support, but he said the real heroes were the veterans, who had the courage to accept help and do the hard work of healing. He said trauma was not something you got over, but something you learned to carry differently. He said every person in this room proved that second chances were real and that giving up was never the answer. When he finished speaking, the entire room stood and applauded for 5 minutes straight. Patricia stood next to her uncle with tears of pride streaming down her face. Richard put his arm around his wife and whispered that this was the best investment he ever made. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Vincent stood outside the center looking up at the stars. Patricia joined him, and they stood in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Vincent said, "You know, for 30 years I thought I failed you. I thought the worst thing I ever did was disappear after that fire. But maybe I had to walk that road. Maybe I had to suffer so I could help others who suffered the same way. Maybe God had a plan I could not see." Patricia took his hand and said, "Uncle Vincent, you never failed me. You saved my life twice. You taught me that real strength is getting back up no matter how many times life knocks you down. Because of you, I learned to judge people by their character and not their circumstances. Because of you, 50 veterans have their lives back. You are my hero, and you always will be." Vincent smiled through his tears and pulled his niece close. He thought about Sarah and hoped that wherever she was, she could see that he had kept his promise after all. He had protected Patricia, and in doing so, he had found his purpose. The story of the homeless man who slapped the billionaire's wife spread across the country. It was shared millions of times on social media. News programs did follow-up stories. Vincent was invited to speak at veterans events and conferences. But fame did not change him. He still lived in his simple apartment. He still spent his days working with homeless veterans. He still remembered what it felt like to be invisible, and he made sure nobody in his program ever felt that way. Richard's company became known not just for real estate, but for social responsibility. Other corporations started their own programs to help homeless populations. Patricia went back to school and got her degree in social work so she could do even more to help. The ripple effect of that one moment in the shopping plaza continued to spread outward, touching thousands of lives. What looked like violence was actually love. What looked like an ending was actually a beginning. What looked like a tragedy was actually a miracle. 2 years after that fateful day in the shopping plaza, Vincent received a phone call that would bring his journey full circle. A woman named Carol had seen his story on television and believed. She knew him from the hospital where he had been treated after the fire 30 years ago. She had been a young nurse back then and remembered a burn victim who disappeared before completing his treatment. She still had records from that time and wanted to meet Vincent. When they met at a coffee shop, Carol brought a folder filled with old medical documents and photographs. Among them was a picture of Vincent in his hospital bed with Sarah standing beside him holding little Patricia's hand. Sarah had visited him every day for 2 months before he vanished. The photograph showed a mother's desperate hope that her brother would recover and come back to them. Vincent held the photograph with shaking hands. It was proof that Sarah had never given up on him. Carol explained that Sarah had left her phone number at the hospital, with instructions to call if Vincent ever returned. She had checked back every week for over a year. Vincent wept as he realized how much his sister had loved him and fought for him. Carol also revealed something else. During Vincent's hospital stay, Sarah had started a small fund to help other burn victims who could not afford treatment. Even in her grief and financial struggle, she thought of others. That fund still existed, and it helped dozens of people over the years. Vincent was stunned. His sister's legacy of helping others had been alive all this time. He asked Carol if he could contribute to the fund and help it grow. She said that would be wonderful and that Sarah would be proud. That evening, Vincent shared the news with Patricia. They looked at the old photograph together and cried healing tears. Patricia said she wished her mother could have lived to see this reunion. Vincent said maybe Sarah knew somehow. Maybe that was why Patricia walked through that plaza on that exact day. Maybe Sarah's love had guided them back to each other. They decided to expand Sarah's fund and merge it with Richard's Veterans Program. They would help not just veterans but all people who suffered from trauma and needed a second chance. They named it Sarah's Hope Foundation. The foundation would provide medical care, counseling, housing, and job training to anyone who needed help rebuilding their life after tragedy. Within a year, Sarah's Hope Foundation had opened 3 centers across California. Vincent traveled to each location personally to train the staff and share his story. He wanted every person who walked through their doors to feel the dignity and respect he had been denied for so many years. He implemented a policy that nobody would ever be turned away because they could not pay. He created support groups where people could share their stories without shame. He built partnerships with employers who were willing to give second chances. The foundation became a model that other cities wanted to copy. Vincent received awards and recognition, but he always said the real reward was seeing someone smile for the first time in years or hearing that a family had been reunited. Richard's business partners, who once thought he was crazy for focusing on charity, now saw that doing good was also good business. Richard's company attracted the best employees because people wanted to work for a company that cared about community. His buildings had waiting lists because people wanted to live somewhere owned by someone with a conscience. Richard learned that success was not about having the most money, but about using whatever you had to lift others up. He started teaching business classes at Vincent's centers, showing people that anyone could start over and build something meaningful. He said his greatest teacher was a homeless man who taught him that every human being deserves dignity and a chance to heal. On the 3rd anniversary of their reunion, Vincent stood at the grave of his sister Sarah. Patricia stood beside him holding flowers. Vincent spoke to his sister as if she could hear him. He told her that he had kept his promise. He told her that Patricia was safe and happy and making a difference in the world. He told her about the hundreds of people who had been helped because of the foundation that bore her name. He told her that her love had never died, but had grown and spread like seeds in the wind. He said he was sorry it took him so long to find his way back, but he was grateful for every step of the journey because it led him here. Patricia placed the flowers on the grave and added her own words. She said, "Mama, Uncle Vincent came home. We are together again, and we are helping people just like you always did. I know you are proud of us. I know you are at peace now." As they walked back to the car, Vincent felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had carried for 30 years. He had spent decades believing he was a failure who abandoned his family. Now he understood that his path, as painful as it was, had purpose. His suffering had given him compassion. His loss had taught him the value of connection. His recovery had shown him that healing was always possible. He thought about all the people in his centers who were walking similar roads. He knew that some would make it and some would fall back. But he also knew that as long as someone was willing to reach out a hand, there was always hope. That was the gift Patricia and Richard had given him. That was the gift he now gave to others every single day. The slap that shot to shopping plaza had become a movement of love that continued to grow and touch lives far beyond anything Vincent could have imagined standing there as a broken homeless man 3 years ago.